It feels like almost every big global event these days, there's some kind of digital angle, right? It really shows how, well, central information and tech have become for national security.
Absolutely. It's almost like information itself is the new battlefield.
Yeah, a new kind of weapon, maybe. A whole new domain.
Exactly. And that growing awareness, that understanding of how critical information is, well, that's really what's behind all the talk about information warfare in U.S. defense circles. You hear that term constantly.
It's everywhere. And, to really get our heads around what it all means, we've been looking into some really interesting analysis. It comes from the Directorate of Advanced Concepts, Technologies, and Information Strategies.
ACTS.
Right, ACTS at the National Defense University. These are the folks thinking about future security challenges, future tech.
They're looking ahead.
So our mission today in this deep dive is to unpack how they see information warfare. We're drawing on what they discussed on the Earl Ducanel podcast. We really want to help you, the listener, sort of navigate this pretty complex idea.
And, one of the first things that jumps out from ACTS, it's actually a challenge to the whole concept. They basically say up front that information warfare as a separate technique of waging war does not exist.
Whoa, okay. That's pretty direct. So if it's not one thing, then what are we talking about? Because, like you said, the term is everywhere.
Well, their take is that what we're seeing isn't one thing, but actually several distinct forms of it, all just kind of bundled under this one big label. They identified 7 specific types.
7. Okay. Let's break those down. What's number 1?
Okay. First is command and control warfare, C2W. Think of it like attacking the enemy's brain and nervous system.
Their decision-making, leadership, comms.
Exactly. Going after their head and neck, as the source puts it. Second is intelligence-based warfare. Now, this is about the systems that give you knowledge, designing them, protecting your own, and denying them to the enemy.
Okay, that makes sense. If you blind your opponent, basically.
Yeah.
Or protect your own eyes, what's after that?
Third is electronic warfare, EW.
Yeah.
This is about the electromagnetic spectrum. Radio waves, signals.
Jamming, maybe? Signals intelligence?
Precisely. Jamming comms, using cryptography, codes to protect your own stuff and maybe crack theirs. Then number 4 is psychological warfare, PSYOPS, using information to influence how people think and feel.
Affecting minds, not just machines. So friendly populations, enemies, neutral parties.
All of the above, their emotions, their reasoning. Yeah, it's about shaping perceptions.
Got it. Okay, that's 4. What are the last 3?
Right. Then we've got what they actually call hacker warfare, which is pretty much what it sounds like.
Attacks on computer systems.
Yep, specifically computer networks and systems. Next, number 6 is economic information warfare. This looks at blocking or maybe channeling information for an economic advantage.
Like messing with financial data.
Yeah.
Or controlling trade info.
Could be, yeah. Affecting markets, that sort of thing. And then finally, number 7 is cyber warfare. And ACTIS describes this one as, well, a bit more futuristic and broad, kind of a grab bag.
A grab bag. Okay. So that sounds like maybe the least clearly defined one.
That's sort of the point they're making. They stress that these 7 forms, they're actually, and this is their term, weakly related.
Weakly related.
Yeah. To get the idea across, they use an analogy. They compare information warfare as a big concept to the term information worker.
Huh. How so?
Well, think about it. A librarian is an information worker, so is a software coder, so is maybe a signals intelligence analyst.
Right. They all deal with information, but their jobs are totally different day to day. Skills, focus, everything.
Exactly. So ACTS is saying these 7 types of information warfare might all involve information, but they aren't necessarily closely linked in practice or methods. They can be quite distinct.
Okay, I get that. So they're not all cut from the same cloth.
Not at all. And they also point out that these forms have really different levels of maturity. Some, like C2W or electronic warfare, have history going way back.
Decades, yeah.
Right. But others, especially that cyber warfare category, are much more speculative, still evolving, kind of looking towards the future.
Okay, now here's something from the analysis that kind of made me pause. This idea that just because we rely more on info systems, attacking them isn't automatically, more valuable. Can you unpack that a bit?
Yeah, that's a really key point and maybe a little counterintuitive. ACTIs argues that as systems become more distributed...
Spread out, you mean? Not all in one place.
Exactly. Spread across lots of networks, lots of devices, instead of big central mainframes, say. Well, if you attack one part of a distributed system, the overall impact might actually be less severe.
because there's no single point of failure.
Yeah.
Like hitting one branch office versus the main HQ.
That's a good way to put it. The distributed network can be more resilient inherently. So it's not just about if information is important, but how those systems are built.
Yeah, that's a really interesting wrinkle. It challenges a common assumption.
It does. And to really hammer home this difficulty in defining information warfare as one single thing, they bring up that classic analogy, the blind man and the elephant.
Oh, yeah, I know that one. Each person touches a different part, the leg, the trunk, the tail, and thinks that's what the elephant is.
Precisely. So if your job is, say, jamming enemy radar, you'll see information warfare very differently than someone running influence campaigns on social media.
Right, your little piece feels like the whole picture.
Exactly. And this fuzziness, this lack of a single clear definition, ACTAS warns it can lead to problems, what they call sloppy thinking.
Sloppy thinking. Okay, what are the dangers there?
Well, one big one is something called false synecdoche. Fancy term, but it means taking one part and making it stand for the whole thing incorrectly. So maybe you see a big cyber attack, like a website defacement, get a lot of headlines.
Right.
And people start thinking that's what information warfare is. They inflate that one aspect.
And the danger is you focus too much on that one thing.
Yeah.
Like website security.
Yeah, you might pour resources into preventing website hacks while completely missing, say, more subtle economic information manipulation that could be way more damaging in the long run. You miss the bigger picture.
Okay, that makes sense. Tunnel vision. What else?
Another issue is just, well, finding a useful common thread. If the concept is so broad that it covers everything from cryptography to propaganda to network attacks, what really holds it together beyond just information and warfare?
It becomes too vague to be helpful analytically.
Potentially, yeah. A definition that covers everything might explain nothing specific. And the third danger they flag is this assumption, maybe an easy one to make for the US, that you can achieve dominance in information warfare, like, say, air warfare.
Ah, the idea of information superiority mirroring air superiority.
Right. XCTS really cautions against that comparison. The nature of information, digital systems, global networks, it's fundamentally different from controlling physical airspace. You can't just, own the infosphere in the same way.
Okay, so if chasing one perfect definition is problematic and comparing it to air power is misleading, what's the ACTIS approach?
They suggest we should probably think of it less as a single concept and more as a mosaic of forms.
A mosaic, okay.
Yeah, this breakdown into the 7 types, it's meant to give analysts, strategists, a way to deal with the complexity, to look at the individual pieces, the different tiles in the mosaic, rather than trying to force it all into one potentially confusing frame.
Understand the parts to understand the whole, even if the whole is a bit fragmented?
Exactly. And thinking about information's power, they bring in a quote from Ann Wells Branscombe. She pointed out that information isn't just abstract, it's a resource. It's something bought, sold, bartered.
And stolen and protected.
And stolen and protected, yeah. That really underlines the stakes here.
High stakes.
But ACTIS refines that a bit for their analysis. They say their focus isn't just on getting information, like intelligence gathering in the classic sense. It's more about the struggle over information processes.
Okay, the processes. What's the difference there? Can you give an example?
Sure. Think about a military logistics system. It uses tons of data, right? Tracking fuel, ammo, whatever.
Yeah, vital information.
Vital, but that system itself isn't inherently information warfare. It only becomes a target in information warfare if an enemy tries to, say, hack in and corrupt the delivery schedules or deny access to the database.
Okay, so it becomes part of the struggle when attacked.
Right. Now, contrast that with, say, an intelligence system specifically designed to figure out what the enemy is trying to hide while the enemy is actively trying to deceive it. That system is inherently part of the struggle over information processes. Its very purpose is to contest the flow and accuracy of information.
Gotcha. It's about the intent and the core functions it's designed to operate within that struggle.
Precisely. And looking at it that way, they argue the core elements really boil down to information denial or distortion and its counterpart protection.
Deny or distort what the enemy knows, protect what you know.
That's the essence. Stop them getting good info, maybe feed them bad info, and make sure your own info is safe and reliable.
And psychological warfare fits into denial too, right? If you convince people your side is good, you're denying the bad narrative.
Exactly. You're trying to deny the perception of hostility, perhaps, or promote the denial of the enemy's legitimacy. It's all about shaping what's accepted as true.
And cyber warfare.
Yeah.
Still the slightly fuzzy one.
Still that broad category, yeah. Where the lines get really blurry between attacking systems, stealing data, spreading disinformation.
Yeah,
It touches on many of the other forms.
okay. Now, ACTIS also mentions this common idea, you hear it a lot, that information tech is just fundamentally changing society. And so it must be changing warfare, too.
Right. The argument goes that we're in an information age, so nations that are good with information collecting it, processing it, using it should have a big advantage.
Which sounds logical on the surface.
It does, but again, the ACTIS analysis urges a bit of caution. It's probably true that information capabilities matter more than ever, but how they translate into actual military advantage and whether it creates a simple path to dominance, that's maybe more complicated than it looks.
So it brings us back to those big questions. Can we even get a single good definition of information warfare? And, maybe more importantly, does it really matter if we can't?
Yeah, maybe the hunt for the definition is less important than understanding the different things happening under that umbrella. The ACTIS analysis really suggests it's more fruitful to analyze the distinct parts, the mosaic pieces, rather than searching for one unifying theory that might not actually exist.
Okay, so wrapping this up, the big takeaway from this deep dive into the ACTIS perspective seems to be, don't think of information warfare as one monolithic thing.
Exactly. It's more like a collection of different activities, sometimes related, sometimes not so much. But they all revolve around this core idea, the struggle to control information processes.
Denying or distorting the enemy's view, protecting your own.
That's the thread. And when you really look at the variety in those 7 forms we discussed, from jamming signals to economic manipulation to psychological obs to network attacks,
There's a huge range.
it really is. And it makes you think, well, for us, for you listening, in this age where information is everywhere and misinformation is too, what are the most important bits of this to understand? Which parts should we, as individuals and societies, really be focused on protecting ourselves against or just being aware of?
That's a really powerful thought to leave folks with. It circles back to that idea from the source material, right? The need to think for ourselves in all this complexity. Thanks for breaking it down.
Glad to do it. It's definitely a lot to chew on.